afternoon. This conversation is the third of the 2 Centuries of Jacksonville series for 2022, which is a production of the Jessie Ball duPont Fund and the Jaxson magazine, launched by Modern Cities in association with WJCT Public Broadcasting. The Jaxson is a multimedia project dedicated to urbanism on Florida's First Coast. My name is Ennis Davis, and I'm a senior planner with Benish & Company, a public historian, vice president of membership and outreach for the Florida chapter of the American Planning Association and the Florida Trust Historic Preservation, and a co-founder of online media productions, the JacksonMag.com and ModernCities.com. And I'll be a moderator for today's panel discussion. So before we dive into today's topic on placemaking and placekeeping, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Number 1, please introduce yourselves in the chat box if you have not already. Number 2, this session will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants next week. A follow-up survey will then be sent to all participants on Monday of next week. Number 3, the duPont Fund is available for tech support, so please use your chat function for all troubleshooting requests. And number 4, we will have some time reserved for Q&A after our panelists share their expertise. So please use the Q&A function in your Zoom controls to add any questions at any time during our conversation today. So we will be focusing on placemaking and placekeeping. We hope that all participants will leave today's session with a better understanding of the following learning objectives. Number 1, to understand the critical differences between placemaking and placekeeping and examples of true placekeeping projects. Number 2, how to think critically about the impact of projects and the people that build themselves as placemaking. And then number 3, how to engage in the civic process in support of placekeeping that gives voice to existing and often underrepresented communities. So we're honored to have 2 great guests today, 2 people I really respect to join us for this conversation. We have Kady Yellow, who is a creative placemaking specialist, and Mike Field, who is a banking executive, incremental real estate developer, and a professional YIMBY. So at this time, I'm going to have both of our panelists just say a little bit about themselves and personally introduce themselves and share a little bit about their background. Kady, you can go first.
Happy to do that, and thanks again for having me. So I was not prepared to introduce myself. I hate talking about myself, but I'll give you a little bit of my background so that you understand what I care about, and it makes my presentation later make more sense. So I grew up low-income at-risk youth in New York. Essentially what that means is I'm from an early age on categorized as having less access and lots of barriers just moving through life. And so I'm very passionate about removing barriers to access. I ended up earning my bachelor's degree in mathematics. So I'm kind of like a scientist, and I see city planning and urban issues as complex math problems that all have solutions. And then I went on to get my graduate work in arts administration because I'm in the cultural sector with creative placemaking. I just returned from the Netherlands where I keynote spoke on my work and shared about my process of how I placekeep and how I lead a highly engaged citizen-driven process. So I'm happy to be here by way of New York, even though y'all did recruit me from Southeast Michigan, where I practiced for a few years and really cut my teeth on this stuff. So thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to presenting a little bit.
Thank you, Kady. Mike?
I really appreciate that Kady uses the word y'all already. That's great to me. My name is Mike Field. I'm born and raised here in Jacksonville. Moved away several times. I have spent the last 20 years of my career in the commercial banking sector. And so I work with real estate projects really all around the country. And then locally, I work with developers, nonprofits, and other business owners on kind of economic development and placemaking initiatives. My primary focus is on the urban core. I like long walks on the beach and a cold craft beer every once in a while.
Oh, he's muted.
Yes, you're on mute.
Yeah, I should not be on mute. So again, thank you both for joining us today. I appreciate you introducing yourselves. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. So the term placemaking has evolved to become a popular buzzword in today's community. However, places have been made throughout history. So with this said, I'd like to start our conversation with a brief presentation on placemaking and placekeeping examples in Jacksonville and in other communities. Some of these examples we'll be familiar with. Others, most of us will probably not have ever defined them as forms of placemaking and placekeeping. So first, we must ask ourselves, what is placemaking? In general, placemaking can be described as a process of community development that leverages public, private, and nonprofit or nonprofit funding to strategically shape and change the physical and social character of a neighborhood or space using arts and cultural activities. Several examples highlighting the diversity in placemaking initiatives can be found throughout our community. For much of its history, the heart of San Marcos Square was largely dedicated to vehicular traffic. Working with the city of Jacksonville, the San Marco Preservation Society and the San Marco Merchants Association announced plans in 2020 to modify the intersection of San Marco Boulevard and Atlantic Boulevard through the expansion of Bayless Park. The opportunity materialized as a solution to a traffic bottleneck. As a result, automobile movement has been improved on existing streets and the community gained a great public amenity. The most impressive feat may be that this project was funded through private donations and took advantage of existing amenities in the area. As a result, no city money was used to construct and maintain the space. One of the best examples of tactical urbanism and placemaking in downtown can be found on Hogan Street, where a retail-less parking garage was completed in 2015. For the last few years, a dead block of sidewalk, which is a common characteristic of the North Bank, has come to life as the Court Urban Food Park. Not only has this place been made, foot traffic has been stimulated, local jobs have been created, and brick and mortar restaurants and storefronts have been filled in downtown Five Points, Springfield, and other neighborhoods as many trucks have since morphed into restaurants. Another placemaking favorite is the former Hayden Burns Library. It was not only known for its mid-century architecture, but it was also known as a place with pedestrian hostile blank walls. In recent years, those walls have become a living canvas for Jacksonville's multicultural heritage. Throughout downtown, murals are another form of placemaking that have given a life and a fresh look to an environment that was once filled with a variety of blank spaces. There's also a myth that urban revitalization can really be hard, takes a lot of time, study, and money. However, in many situations, it's the little things that make a big difference, and they're often relatively simple. Fortunately, many of the things that work best to build vibrancy are relatively easy to pull off with a little vision and coordination. Downtown Lakeland offers a good example. Nearly 20 years ago, Main Street, shown here, was converted from a three-lane one-way highway into a two-way street with parallel parking. This created a better environment for pedestrians, and over time, historic storefronts were filled with restaurants, bars, and shops. However, narrow sidewalks prevented further activation of the streetscape. To further activate the area, Lakeland launched a $115,000 one-month project to replace one block of parallel parking spaces, 11 parking spaces in total, to allow existing businesses to create a sidewalks cafe style environment. And so here are some pictures of the before in the upper left corner, and the remaining pictures show what that environment is today. There are also examples of placemaking all around us that we may overlook on a daily basis. These examples include the combination of a food truck and an old gas station into an outdoor eater on the west side, a building decorated with materials from nearby demolished properties in La Villa, and an outdoor gathering space adjacent to a stormwater retention pond in Grand Park. While there are examples of placemaking activities resulting in positive change, some placemaking activities can also support gentrification, racism, real estate speculation, all in the name of neighborhood revitalization. Unfortunately, examples of negative aspects of placemaking can also be found locally as well. Once connecting La Villa's red light district with Sugar Hill and Jacksonville's northwest suburbs, Davis Street was one of La Villa's major mixed-use thoroughfares, along with Ashley and Broad Streets. While never known for its architectural elegance, its history is forever linked with the Great Fire in 1901, the establishment of what is now known as the Chitlin Circuit, civil rights, and the growth of the city's Black middle class during segregation. Unfortunately, ignoring Davis Street and the surrounding community that was already a place, government-funded urban renewal converted this once vibrant thoroughfare of African-American history and culture in Jacksonville into an empty space filled with seldom used pocket parks, surface parking lots, and vacant lots. The loss of place in communities of rich history and culture like La Villa and Brooklyn lead us to the term placekeeping. Across the country, placekeeping has come into usage as a counter to traditional placemaking. Placekeeping can be described as the active care and maintenance of a place and its social fabric by the people who live and work there. It is not just preserving buildings, but keeping the cultural memories associated with the local community alive, while supporting the ability of the local community to maintain its way of life as it chooses. So what does placekeeping look like in practice? Well, in Atlanta, Auburn Avenue was once known as the richest Black street in the world. Designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1978, Auburn Avenue's ongoing rebirth is being fueled by a mix of history, preservation, public infrastructure, investment, and place-making initiatives that are directly linked to the community and its past. Then there's the historic Eagle Saloon in New Orleans. Dating back to 1851, the building is considered to be one of the most important early jazz landmarks in the country. While efforts are underway to secure funding for its complete restoration, historic plaques and window displays highlight some of the iconic musicians who performed at the site, linking the past with the present. The Scrub was a community that was erased by the construction of Interstate 4 and Interstate 275 just north of downtown Tampa. Redesigned and renovated in 2016 for $6.3 million, Perry Harvey Senior Park now includes amenities such as a heritage trail, clay tile murals, timeline pavers, sculptures, and art installations as a part of that community's current revitalization efforts. In the Midwest, Chicago's Bronzeville was once a national hub for blues music as a result of the Great Migration. However, by the 1990s, as a result of urban renewal, it was littered with more than 3,000 scattered vacant lots. Today, Bronzeville is an example of a historic community where revitalization is underway, but unlike many neighborhoods facing gentrification and displacement of long-time residents, the neighborhood continues to maintain its cultural heritage without driving people away. Like many of the previous examples, placekeeping initiatives are largely focused on this community's story, its culture, and entrepreneurship economic opportunities. Closer to home, we'll close this out with a local example, the East Side. Situated on land that was granted to Daniel Hogans in 1817, the East Side is a collection of Gullah Geechee communities that are also known as Out East. While platted in 1869, it was a place where industrialized slavery and slavery for hire was dominant in its lumber mills, shipyards, and wharfs prior to the Civil War. It was quickly settled by freedmen and freed women attracted to inexpensive housing and employment along the docks and sawmills along the riverfront. Many settlers resided in single and double tenement wood frame shotgun homes built by African-American architects and contractors. Its economy was negatively impacted by hot expressway construction, the development of the sports and entertainment district, and redlining. Seeking to avoid gentrification and the loss of sense of place that La Villa and Brooklyn have experienced on the other side of downtown, the East Side is currently engaged in a variety of placemaking or placekeeping strategies intended to protect the community. So already being a place, the East Side Restore and Repair program has been established to protect the most vulnerable residents from displacement while also repairing existing building stock. Another program called Project Boots is intended to foster home ownership and infill housing opportunities on vacant lots. While many may not directly associate these initiatives with a more limited view of placemaking, they are very critical in placekeeping a community that is just as old as Jacksonville itself. These initiatives are also being supported by an effort to designate the community as a National Register Historic District and implement a culturally appropriate zoning overlay as policy modifications that can placekeep, guide future growth patterns, and generate new economic opportunities and job growth for the existing community. And last, while many may associate the Dev Store restoration project, which recently just broke ground, as something that eliminates the neighborhood's food desert status, is really much more than that. This is a project that is also immersed in the concept of placekeeping through the restoration of a historic structure and a use of that structure that is directly tied back to the neighborhood's history, heritage, and culture. Let's see, I'm going to unshare my screen. So now that we have a general visual perspective of the concepts of placekeeping and placemaking, I have a few questions for both of our panelists today. And so my first question is going to be for Kady. So Kady, my question for you is, what placekeeping principles have you seen playing out in your work that you bring to Jacksonville?
Thanks, Ennis. I appreciate that. I think it will be very clear in my presentation. I'm about to share my screen. But in terms of placekeeping, the part of the word I really focus on is the keeper component, right? It's the person that's preserving, it's sustaining and building upon their identity and their sense of place. But in particular, placekeeping in the process, the importance of it is that communities are agents and of their own change and of their own development. that they're self-determining, and that essentially they don't see city and government and foundations and funding and urban planners and designers as a source of hope, but rather they are organized and prepared that when they do take interest, which is what residents certainly want, that when that interest is finally shown and expressed, that they're prepared to direct it and that they're empowered to do so. So that's what's really important that's a really important principle to me in my work. I'm going to share my screen because I teach by example, and I'm excited to hop in and show you 4 examples of placekeeping out of about, 250 projects I've done the past 10 years in this space. So I'm going to share my screen and hop in. So the first thing I want to do is just give you guys some infrastructure for your mind so that you can apply these to the 4 examples I'm about to present on. A little bit about my process and my intention. The way I practice placemaking is a citizen-driven process. Essentially, I split up the work between myself and admin team and the residents I'm working with. The kind of work that I put on my desk is what I find the time-consuming, boring stuff, the administration, the permitting, the bureaucracy, and the fundraising. And then what I empower or assign to the citizen or highly collaborate with them on is the design, the curation, the choice of project, and how they want to bring life to the space that's being activated or transformed. And so it's a highly collaborative process, and we're constantly learning from each other. And then ultimately, working in downtown districts and bids, my goal is for vibrant public spaces and public spaces that are truly public, and that rights of way like sidewalks and roads are made for people and not for cars. And then the big end game, big goal is kind of 2-part for me. One is spurring a creative economy. Growing up the way I did, my family and the people around me had very limited options in which economies they could participate in. So I'm very passionate about expanding the creative economy. So that for me means putting a majority of funding that comes across my desk into the pockets of musicians and artists and poets and culture bearers, authors, writers, etc. And then the second that's so important to me is social capital. So for those of you who don't know what that word means, it's this idea that your network is your resource pool in which you solve your own problems with. And so problems I've dealt with in the past, like homelessness and happiness, can more easily be solved based on social capital. So I'm through this process hoping to empower people and expand their networks. My model is super simple. And like Ennis referred to, really low budget, not high dollar projects. What I do is I kind of act as a grantor. I do projects anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. And then residents come to me through a process where we, again, split up that work. I'm doing the paperwork and the permitting, and they're taking on the curation and responsibility to get a few hundred people into a public space in downtown. And so I'm excited to tell you 4 stories of about almost 500 people that came through my process in Michigan. I'm hoping that they're watching this. I got their blessing before I told their story, and I'm happy to share that today. So one of the first spaces you're looking at is Riverbank Park in downtown Flint. Essentially, the residents, as you guys may know, Flint is famous for putting the world on wheels, and also for its water crisis and economic decline. And so what we're seeing in their public spaces, which was not that long ago, they're very nostalgic, the residents, to bring them back and restore the dignity of when they played with their grandma and grandpa in the water fountain in this park and had really positive association to this large parcel in downtown. So a couple of things we're addressing here through this residents project is old family memories, and then addressing what's now a critically underutilized, mismanaged space in downtown Flint. And if you don't know, Flint does not have a parks department, so parks don't get cleaned or managed unless people take on that onus themselves. So essentially, I go to work with the mayor and permit a hip hop concert on a naturally existing amphitheater. It's no jump in imagination when residents come in and out of their city center that they would love to showcase their music and what they're making in their basement studios. This is also happening during a difficult time because in Michigan, we get declared a state of emergency for gun violence. And unfortunately, there's a small group of people who manage and maintain the city of Flint who don't live within the city. So they're kind of connecting dots where there's no connection. At this point, I'm also deciding to frequent and spend my time and resources on the north side and patronize those bars and businesses. And through that process, I see how the streets work. And essentially, to be able to make this project possible, I start to think through, how do we staff it? How do we keep it safe? How do we make it so all parties are happy? Also at this time, and actually currently today, Flint hip hop is booming. Rolling Stones is now writing about some of the artists. Atlantic Records VP was just hired as a Flintstone. And so there's a huge kind of boom with the hip hop being made there. So I essentially hire super local. I see who's keeping the businesses safe in the north side. I bring them into downtown and hire them to come and keep these concerts feeling good and being implemented in a way that, again, the permit is being issued. I also knew behind the scenes, talking with residents, that while we had the funding for 5 of these concerts, that we were only going to permit 1. That way the government could pallet it, we could show proof of concept, and hopefully see the other 4 concerts come to life. That was hard to explain to residents because the reasons I was getting no for the permit, like 18 to 27-year-olds couldn't possibly hang out in downtown safely, was not a good enough reason for me. And so it was difficult to explain to residents who have a huge distrust in their government and a huge frustration with not having access to public space. Like a lot of the examples today, there's a really beautiful kind of outcome of this. So 2 things happen. One is now GM cleans Riverbank Park once a year. That's better than no times a year. And we've really started to dignify and elevate this really central park in downtown. All 5 of the other shows were permitted. And then also through this process, working with the community, I could see the frustration of the lack of professional space for hip hop artists. And so my board president funded what is now a fully functioning professional hip hop studio in downtown Flint called Wave Village. So these artists are able to come out of their basements and working with what they have to have beautiful state-of-the-art equipment and a video room as well. Also really great about this is the process restores civic engagement. And so when this multi-million-dollar project came online, that the foundation was going to invest in giving a total transformation to Riverbank Park. I know the photo is small, but essentially the renderings come out that a beach is going to be installed and designed, and the fountain's going to be ripped out. And again, like I said, the fountains are a really important part of Flint residents and their memories. And the residents went right to City Hall and are able to direct that funding to essentially remind those who don't live in Flint, who are governing it, that a beach and sunbathing doesn't make sense at the Flint River, and that a beach is really going to be the joke was, or the seriousness was, a big kitty litter box. And so what they propose is, again, they just really want to take a fraction of that funding and bring that water back to life, that water feature, so that they can be reminded of what was, and also bring it to the future, or bring it to the present. So that was a really great outcome of that process. Also, the series is called Concrete Jungle, and it's starting next month in downtown Flint. So it's continuing this year. So this along with many other projects are happening simultaneously. And I start to gain trust with the local government. And they give me the assignment to think through the flat lot. This is a 2-part photo, so I can show you the full view of a full city block. Downtown Flint's about 4 city blocks. This is one whole city block. What you see here is about 15 police officers wrapped around the space. Behind the scenes, we were actually shocked that we even had 15 police officers on staff. If you don't know, Flint police are critically underfunded, understaffed. You often, when you call the police, you get sent to voicemail. And if you do get an officer, that's about an average of 4-hour response time. So it was like, where did 15 police officer cars come from? And why aren't they here when we need them? So my board felt one of 2 ways, that we should lock down the space, keep people out. What's happening is just there's absolutely nothing to do on evenings and weekends. So people are gathering in this parking lot and partying together. I was of a different mindset. I want to dignify the space, add infrastructure to it, and bring some kind of event planning skills to the table. Put a DJ, put trash receptacles, put a pop-up bar that's permitted, and make it a gathering space. So two things happen from this process. I decide to take on what I call parking lot placemaking. I'm staying away from the flat lot at this time just because there was such significant activity there that I was not ready to grapple with, nor were the residents I'm working with. So we went next door, another whole city block of a parking lot, and also closely associated to the new Flint Farmers Market. So what you're seeing here is, again, it's catty corner to the flat lot. It's another parking lot. I decide to work with the residents. They want a stage. They want to dignify the space and give it infrastructure for their parking lot parties. So I bought what you're seeing on the right-hand side is like a big truck. We tore down the side and turned it into a mobile stage with the intention of moving it to the flat lot when we were ready, when the residents were ready to face that space. So what they did together was they came up with this idea to bring a market to the already existing infrastructure there, and also address some of the food insecurity and access in Flint. So very few economic opportunities, but what is happening in the homes on the north and east side is great meals are being cooked. So Tony Vu came to the table. We curated artisans in an artist market. And then under his food permitting and licenses, he ghosted the opportunity for people to come in legally and vend food. So here's more photos of that series. On the left-hand side, you see this 3-part series growing. Poets come and pop up with their typewriters. The bikers start showing up. On the lower right-hand side is the Flindustry. It's 3 females that run the hip hop scene there. And then on the upper right-hand side, essentially this really blew up, and those in Detroit are listening to what's happening culturally in Flint, and we did an exchange. So culture bearers and creators in Flint, in Detroit, came to downtown Flint, just kind of hang out and fraternize and network with the artists, and then Flint was able to go onto a stage in Detroit. Also really cool from this process, so Flint Social Club burst into a brick and mortar. That's Tony Vu on the right-hand side with the headline that he's now incubating home kitchen chefs. So these are all really good examples of the importance of vibrant public space and how ultimately you can support creative economy and social capital. So you see these chefs going from their kitchen to a pop-up market to a brick and mortar. So we're ready to take the flat lot on. The first project to come through that is an all-girls skate club. So they took the few $1,000s, they bought a bunch of boards and helmets and some ramps and popped up in the flat lot a very DIY skate park. This was super successful for a number of reasons. One, it was the first time we were publicly programming the flat lot. And 2, there's now investment in a professional park to be built. So right now, Flintstones are going through the design process to, again, further dignify that space. And then basketball, sports, fitness are huge in Flint. And so basketball, the Flint United team comes online and is launched. And the idea comes up that they used to have this tournament at the flat lot. Why don't we, again, reassociate that space instead of being empty and barricaded and police all over it? Why don't we further program it and bring basketball downtown? So Gus Macker did return last year to the flat lot. And again, just like the other projects, it's re-energizing and healing and reassociating the frustration of space. So I'm gonna go through one more example because I don't want to take up too much time. I really want to get to Q&A. This is a great project. It's an alley transformation. What you're looking at on the left-hand side is Buckham Alley. The artists come, so a bunch of visual artists come through my process and they're like, listen, we haven't had enough space for 10 years, just like the hip hop artists who are in their basements. We're also in the basement during pop-up shows. We need better spaces. And then there's no jump in the imagination of what this alley could be. They just need help doing the paperwork and the funding. On the right-hand side, you see the first activation, and then here are photos of that day. So gave them the alley for 12 hours permitted, super low brow. You can see it's just artwork sitting on a table, leaning against a wall, some uplighting, a DJ, and about 200 people came through this space that day. What was super exciting about this was, again, it's the $2,000 model, super low budget. Instantly, we get a grant. So this is the front page of the paper. We get a placemaking grant to transform that space. We used the money to level it, lay pea gravel, put a mural, a wall garden entrance, and then install electricity because the generators are expensive and always go out, and also more professional gallery hanging hardwire. So that's what you're looking at, is the alley changed. And then we permit a series of pop-ups here. And again, the market was so successful that we decided to do a similar thing called Sound and Vision, focusing on local music and artwork. And so what's really beautiful about what you're looking at here was this creative economy budding up. These markets, the vendors made about $10,000 in sales. And I failed to mention that that first pop-up, the visual artist sold about $2,000 in canvas work, which is totally unheard of for visual artists in the area. Here also, I was able to bring my expertise of protecting and culture, protecting artists. I know that there's a vicious cycle of bringing us to a space to make it more beautiful, bring value to it, and then we get booted. It's emotional and horrible. And so I got a year contract for the artists to have access to this space once a month. And certainly after that first pop-up, the owners were very quick to assume that we were done. Y'all did a great job at changing it and making it look more beautiful. They didn't need us anymore, but that was not the case. We had the funding and we had the contract. So I know I'm out of time. I have a few more examples that I'll save for another time, but I really appreciate you guys allowing me to share these stories and showing you my process and how I plan to practice in Jacksonville. And I just remind you how important it is that the community is our boss, that they're our guide, and that they fully inform this work. They know the sacredness of grounds in Jacksonville. They know the history. And so I'm absolutely going to rely on them to direct my work and the resources I bring to the table. So thanks so much. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Kady. That was a great presentation. Before I get to Mike's question, for the participants out there who listen today, feel free to use the Q&A box if you have any questions that you want our panelists to answer today. And also, if you can throw in the chat some of your favorite placemaking and placekeeping projects that you've seen in Jacksonville or other places, we like to see that as well. So I'm going to turn to you, Mike, now. And Mike, I have a question for you. Can you share your experience in creating what I think is one of the best placemaking initiatives in downtown Jacksonville, which is the Hogan Street, the Court Food Truck Park?
Yeah, and I think what Kady said is 100% true. It doesn't take a lot of money to do a lot of these things, and I think that's one of the big obstacles that I think we face, is the mindset that we need to spend a lot of money to make urban environments particularly relevant, and really that's not true. And so the Court Urban Food Park is a good example, because there was kind of a process in place, or we basically created a process to make that lot something more than it was. And I'm going to try to share my screen here and kind of just walk through that process, really briefly. So initially, when the parking garage was first proposed by a developer who I always have to say is now a convicted felon. He initially wanted to put this parking garage and make it a dead space. And the Jackson Landing isn't there any longer, but this lot has the potential to be a significant face of Jacksonville. You can see it on the skyline currently. Whenever the landing space becomes something different, this will be kind of the front porch for that area. The Emerald Trail will run along Hogan Street here. So this is really a critical piece of land for downtown in general. The developer initially wanted to have no retail spaces along the parking garage. And then, as you can kind of see on the left-hand side of the screen, they wanted to use the space in between the parking garage and what is now the ViStar Tower, make that actually a two-way street. So we'd have even more streets downtown and a kind of a dead space altogether. This is kind of a better blow up of that plan. They would have added a surface parking lot along Bay Street, put a 2-lane road in between the ViStar Tower and the parking garage, and then have Hogan Street completely devoid of any type of presence whatsoever. What we proposed, and this was one of these are on the team that helped kind of visualize this, was to kind of reposition the parking garage. It wouldn't, the developers kind of modus operandi was, you know, there wasn't a market for retail. They didn't want to spend a lot of money. And so we proposed a solution that didn't require them to spend any money whatsoever, just reposition the property in a different way. Simply moving the parking garage closer to the building would allow for future infill to occur as the market improves. So as downtown grows, you have the opportunity to build retail spaces there in the future by basically setting the parking garage back by about 25 feet that allow those spaces to exist. And it also eliminated a surface parking lot along Bay Street and made the space in between the parking garage and what is now the ViStar Tower to be more of an intimate space that could be a kind of a future amenity for the building. And so we basically came up with the idea that, you know, you could build this retail here in the future. It actually was codified in the city code, where when the building was at a 65% occupancy rate, the developer would be required to build this retail structure. That 65% occupancy, I think, really happened about 5 years ago, and really nothing got done. So what we proposed to do was turn that space into a food truck court. Because there is that 25 feet of a future retail space, we were able to, you know, spend very little money to hang up some lights and put planter boxes in and bring some tables in. And we have food trucks that come on site 5 days a week. It's probably the most popular lunchtime destination in downtown. When ViStar purchased the building and the parking garage, their employees were very hesitant to move from a suburban location to downtown. And the food truck court was kind of their first kind of gathering space when they went back in or moved into the downtown offices. And it really changed their perception on that downtown wasn't this really scary place for them, that they can actually you know, enjoy their working day better than they would in some, you know, suburban office park somewhere with nothing around it. We are a rent-paying business that does generate rental income back to the property owner. Another big aspect of this is that, you know, we have a very, very, very culturally diverse set of entrepreneurs that come on site now. Each month we have about 25 small business owners that participate in the food truck court. It allows downtown to have a kind of a diverse food offering that they normally wouldn't have. And as Ennis noted, 2 of the food trucks have moved into permanent brick and mortar spaces downtown. As downtown continues to improve and people come back to the office, we have about 3 trucks that we're working with to find them additional spaces downtown. It served as kind of a test kitchen, so to speak, to say, you know, would their product, you know, be well received downtown by the downtown office workers and downtown visitors. And we certainly have more people that would want a brick and mortar space downtown than we actually have brick and mortar spaces economically available to them. Also, this allowed ViStar to construct the alleyway adjacent in between the parking garage to the building itself. They were able to put a public stage on, permanent seating. There's a shipping container restaurant, the Bread and Burger, which is adjacent, or which is the same operators as the bread and board space within the ViStar building itself. Again, this was going to be a 2-way street with surface parking originally, before we kind of came in and said, no, let's not do that. There's a better way to do it. It's not going to cost a lot of money. You can still, as a developer, maintain your pro forma and spend the money you want to spend and make this space better for everybody. Just as a kind of a visual representation, this is what that space would have been if the developer originally, put forth their plan as presented. So this is now turned into this, and it was really a very super easy effort that really cost very little money whatsoever, and really has been an amenity that's been well received by everyone.
I appreciate that, Mike. Just kind of knowing that backstory it's been pretty inspirational to kind of see where things started off back in 2012 or so, and how things have changed now, and just see some of the entrepreneurs who were starting off back then and what they've been able to do. I mean, Jacksonville wasn't considered to be much of a foodie city, back in those days. And now there's a whole different theme around downtown, not just downtown, really many of the neighborhoods surrounding downtown and now stretching out to the suburbs itself. So we're going to jump into the Q&A portion of this topic. And again, if you have any questions or comments that you would like our panelists to answer, or we have them here, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start off with the first question here. And this is I'm going to make it for both of you. So here's the question. So these are all great projects, and thank you for sharing them with us. I'd love to hear more about how you're thinking about building for sustainability. So, for example, activities that are one-time events become regular community staple events. Thanks. So how can we take these really tactical, urbanist-oriented type of concepts and use them as ways to become a part of the community in the long term?
I'll jump in. I have a specific example, I think that kind of goes along with what you're asking. About 7 years ago now, when I was a much younger man, I started an event called Jackson's Night Market. So everybody loves the downtown art walk that DVI puts on. That's once a month. Retailers make, a decent amount of money on those nights. It helps them pay their rent. And they decided, we want to do a second event downtown. We want to do a second art walk. And well, second art walks is probably kind of lame. Art walk is what it is, and it's good. So let's not, recreate the wheel, but let's do something different. So we started to do a night market that was originally started in the Laura Trio lot. We brought in a very specific curated list of vendors that wasn't art walk, but it was a little bit more food focused and more focused on specific retailers that have an existing business that don't currently operate in a storefront. And so it kind of introduced them to the downtown market again. So we did it once a month. It kind of bookended Art Walk. Art Walk was on the first Wednesday of the month. Jackson Night Market was on the third Thursday of the month. And I then worked with the business owners because a lot of them, like I said, didn't have existing brick and mortar locations, but they wanted to, expand into that realm. And what I do for a living, that's what I do for a living. So I was able to say, you may make a great, you may bake bread better than anybody, but you don't know how to put a business plan together. You hardly, QuickBooks is confusing to you, and it's confusing to me too sometimes. So let's also work with you and work with developers and real estate building owners in the area to put together a business plan, to talk about what to ask for when you negotiate a lease. Here's how you present a business plan for financing, for banking incentives. And so the night market was for one a kind of a monthly market, but it was also a business incubator. We went through a program that teaches these vendors how to negotiate with landlords, how to put together business plans. And of that, we had about 16 vendors that opened permanent brick and mortar locations. All of them were in the urban core of Jacksonville. and about half of those were in downtown. A couple of them closed during the pandemic, but that's a really specific example of, you know, a placemaking kind of a temporary event that led to something a little bit greater, because the intention was all around the fact that you wanted to bring these vendors from their pop-up mobile locations into a permanent location.
You're on mute, Kady.
Thanks, Mike. I have a specific example as well. And so I didn't share this in the beginning, but those of you who don't know, I'm very new to Jacksonville. I've only been here about 5 months. And so I'm still listening, learning, and understanding what the funding opportunities are locally. I skipped the slides earlier, but because there was so much fear of local government and foundation to invest in Michigan, just purely these social and cultural engagements, I brought crowdfunding to the table. I crowdfunded my way through grad school and publishing my first book. So it's a very powerful, no strings attached tool, but it's not sustainable and you can't do it year to year. So I'm definitely a placemaker, but really behind the scenes, I'm a grant writer. And so I'm very interested to see what the foundation and grantors locally want to invest in, because the real issue with long-term traditions or gatherings that go on as not just pop-ups in series, but indefinitely is funding. And I also just want to take the moment to remind the audience that there's a huge difference between an event and a placemaking project. I am launching a new department at Downtown Vision, events and placemaking, and we'll certainly distinguish those over time for you. But event is really a round table, a small event planning team. They curate it, they put it on, they invite you and you show up. As you know, that's not placemaking. Placemaking is a process that's completely different. But I think the example I'd like to point to in our events section of my department is Sip and Stroll, especially since it's fresh on the mind because we all gathered last night on the South Bank. But that came from a pop-up. We hold an annual gala placemaking fundraiser. And Haley Tinkle, who's an incredible event specialist and who is now my director of events, curated essentially the Sip and Stroll format for our gala. And it evolved into and is now funded as a regularly scheduled every third Thursday. We totally transformed the South Bank for you to be able to bring your family, your pets, your friends, your visitors to enjoy a highly interactive kind of full length of the Riverwalk activations. We recently added a silent disco at the pool at Doubletree, which is very successful. I have experience with those in the past because of noise ordinances after 10 o'clock, but we really just want to capture the audience that does not want to go home at 8 p.m. when the event ends. So I think Sip and Stroll is a great example. And I encourage you, if you see grants or funding opportunities out there, to send them to Downtown Vision as we grow our portfolio, because I find that to be the biggest barrier is funding. And so thanks so much for allowing me to answer that question.
Thank you. So Kady, I'm going to turn right back around to you because the next question is addressed for you. This is, when you permitted events in Flint, there was a police presence required. This is something that feels sticky because cities want to keep things safe, but having a police presence also changes the vibe for attendees, especially in BIPOC communities. How have you navigated this?
Yeah, I love that question. And thank you so much, because it was the most sticky in Flint, Michigan. So I'm going to do my best to speak eloquently to this and diplomatically, because I just have so much frustration with my time there. So a couple of things happened. One, it wasn't required because the city knew they could not provide it. There are not enough police officers to even man the streets, let alone deal with my hundreds and hundreds of hours of pop-ups. The Mott Foundation, which is kind of our equivalent here of the Jessie Ball duPont, was insistent that we had Flint police. So what I did was what I do with every single decision along the way is I rely on the residents, but also use my observation and intelligence to, you never guarantee safety, but make sure that all bases are covered. I did my graduate school in Ireland and had to deal with some of the worst case scenarios of active shooters and cars intercepting crowds. And so I was always like very heightened more about that because I was in the community in Flint. I understood gun violence more than those trying to police it. And so the number one thing for me, long story short, is that there was some form of protection, not only for medical and other scenarios to deal with, but that we just had an emergency plan. For me and the residents, it was to hire the private security guards that were keeping the streets safe on the north side. And what ended up coming up of that is the Mott Foundation gave me a 6-figure grant to hire Flint police to police every single pop-up that we did. Of course, I knew that the city couldn't provide it, so we took on the funding, and I ended up putting all $100,000 into the pocket of the private security teams on the ground. I actually spent a little bit more, but it was because they would have to show up earlier than just the shift, because it was their grandma and their cousin and their best friend from high school. And so they took time to fraternize. I don't know what the scenario is here in Jacksonville. I did co-produce Jack's River Jams and had to think through the emergency plan for that as well. And so I just hope to bring my expertise to the table and work locally with Zone 1 police officers and also just assess safety based on a number of facets. So yes, it was very sticky in Flint. When we did a couple times for the North Side Porch Fest, we had actual police officers show up. And essentially before that, I said, like, don't bug these guys for these 3 activities. If there's an actual issue, please come to me and we'll figure out a solution. But it was never a concern that a gun would be shot off at all. The concerns were different. So again, community totally led that. And I just advocated for them, but I'm too new to Jacksonville to assess that. And that's as comfortable as I am to talk on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. So this question is going to be for both of you. And really it's around the pandemic. You know, has the pandemic presented restrictions as well as opportunities in the initiatives that you're involved in?
Mike, you want to jump in?
I'm sorry, I didn't even hear the question. I'm sorry.
No problem. Has the pandemic presented opportunities as well as restrictions with the various placemaking initiatives you've been involved in?
So I have a good example of this. If you guys don't know or forgot, Michigan was one of the strictest states in the nation. We were so on lockdown that residents took it upon themselves to try to kidnap the governor. They stormed the Capitol. Essentially, you've got a state with not great economies and having very little being taken away from us at the time. So the entire 2 years I was in Michigan was through that type of lockdown. And so all of the projects I presented today were implemented with another layer of just bureaucracy and contention. One, because it became the most vulnerable populations were the most affected, and it became a socio-economic kind of battle. Essentially, those who could stay at home comfortably or on their lake house did so, but a lot of the residents that I showed on the screens today didn't have that option. And so essentially what I did was stayed up every single night, long nights reading the CDC state and city requirements on how we could gather. And what it came down to eventually is that we could gather outside with masks 6 feet apart. At one point, it was 100 people. At one point, it was 500 people I could gather, but my model didn't break because my model was always a few hundred people. So essentially, we added a free kind of Eventbrite ticket so that I could guarantee the mayor I wouldn't have more than 100 or 500 people. But we had huge restrictions. And I don't know that that really led to any opportunity except for the fact that we did programs that were very unique to, because you can't really enforce social distancing. The circles are cute. The ways that we tried to were not conducive to socializing. So we made events that like baked in the distance. So 100 people at Riverbank Park guaranteed social distancing. Or a project I left off the screen was Porch Fest. I spoke about a little bit, but it guarantees social distancing because we had so much space. There's a really cool project that came online called Stroll. So instead of the musicians staying in one spot, they got up, played a set. As soon as the crowd gathered, they moved down a little bit more. Same with the pop-up poets. So these were happening after months and months of absolutely no contact for those who were able to occupy space that way. So I just want to be heavy on the restrictions because we were under such heavy restriction in Michigan.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything for me to add, but I think that what the pandemic has taught me is that, kind of walkable commercial districts are more important now than ever with the pandemic, and how we treat that is really going to be important to our city's future going forward. That's really all I can add to that.
That's a great point, Mike. And I also, just because I'm originally from New York, I love seeing the 18,000 streeteries that were built in response to the restrictions, because just like Michigan, New York was very restrictive and on lockdown. And I just love the innovation and culture. Like I did my grad school in New Orleans, so I'm closely tied to that place. But Mardi Gras totally transformed into house floats. I'm sure you've seen that. It was all over the New York Times and very high visibility. But I think those are two beautiful opportunities that I wasn't personally involved in, but I got to see from a distance.
And I'm just going to add to that, and Mike, you were certainly involved in this one as well. But just listening to you two talk, and this question about opportunities that the pandemic created. With the Jaxson, the pandemic created an opportunity to take this space, this virtual space that we're in right now, and to actually have the same conversation in the format of walking tours. So people were pent up in their homes, nothing else to do, and figured out pretty quick, hey, we could do an outdoor walking tour of downtown or a cemetery or a different neighborhood, talk about an issue, show a space that was placemate or in the process of being place kept, so people could get on the ground and visualize that. But what's happened in the long run is, we're 2 years in now, and I can't tell you how many people are out doing tours now. So it's been sort of like the food truck park has created this new economy that spawned a lot of new businesses. A temporary thing of showing different places around town in the urban core has created a new market of entrepreneurs around town as well. So I'm going to jump to the next question now. And this is for both of you as well. Kady, I don't know, you're new to town, so we'll see how you answer this one, but we'll here. So what is unique about Jacksonville that should shape its approach to placemaking? That is the question. What is unique about Jacksonville that should shape its approach to placemaking?
Last week I was had an out-of-town developer that we took around and went to dinner with, and they asked, why has everything been torn down around here? And you're trying to show this out-of-town real estate developer a good time, and so you don't want to be negative whatsoever. But I think I don't know if it's unique in Jacksonville, because this happened all over urban environments in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But there's a tremendous opportunity in Jacksonville to kind of reimagine spaces that have been erased, but have a lot of history there to them, specifically communities like Durkeeville, La Villa, the East Side. I think it's kind of unique that there is places that have such unique history already baked into them that are have been through no fault or no intention of their own, have been pretty much decimated, that have an opportunity to be reimagined in a more productive way. So I don't know if that's particularly unique to Jacksonville, but that's how I kind of see things. And to your point, when we do these walking tours, that's how I kind of view these areas when you walk around or drive through areas, as to kind of imagine what was there, what was the bones that made this place once great, and how do you kind of rehabilitate that into a productive use for today's world that also is respectful to the history of a place, and also reinforces the structural, I don't know, the structure that made that place functional at one point in time.
Yeah, I think that, oh, go ahead, Kady.
No, it's okay.
Oh, I was just gonna just piggyback off what you said, Mike. That's the link between place making and place keeping is the community and its story. I mean, really, what is unique about Jacksonville? I mean, its history, its culture within the neighborhoods, the story of itself, that is unique. And really that's unique about every single community. We're all not the same. And I think sometimes when placemaking can veer on the negative side of it is when we go in and try to recreate places that already exist, that already have a story. We don't acknowledge those stories. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people talk about LaVille and say, oh, this is a blank slate, we can do this. No, just because someone intentionally took property away from people and tore something down does not mean that place is still not significant to that community. So I think that's a very big learned objective to take away from the concepts of place making and place keeping is that these things need to be done in a manner that really promotes that unique heritage and culture of the community that's present.
Right, and you look at LaVille specifically. I mean, I'm really fascinated by Broad Street because you had an article on the Jaxson, a couple of years ago about how Memphis Beale Street was basically about the same bones as LaVille's Broad Street is, 30 years ago in the 1970s. There was about the same amount of building stock as Broad Street has today. But there were, kind of cultural anchors to that area that kind of spoke to its pasts that, were built upon. So, we look we look at like the DIA's La Villa plan, and it reimagines La Villa into this education campus and apartment buildings and things of that nature, but it really ignores the commercial corridors that were already there in place that have the ability to be rejuvenated and respectful of the history of that place itself.
I also like the second half of that question, right? What is unique about Jacksonville and how is it going to inform future placemaking? I did not just randomly land in Jacksonville. I wanted a non-grant funded position in a city with a few assets that you guys have. And then as a totally new person who did research it from a distance, what I do find most unique and what will inform my work as your director of placemaking is the size of it. So all of this kind of mosaic of neighborhoods. I see your downtown, it's so big as a neighborhood of neighborhoods. I also think very unique is that you have the largest park system in the nation. And so that is a space that I specifically focus on as public parks. So I look forward to elevating, celebrating, and bringing resources to that. And then also just the riverfront access. I know in the comment section, someone noted the duPont's recent study, and I hope to also focus the resident-driven process on the riverfront, but I think those are three very unique aspects to Jacksonville, the place, that I'll certainly focus on in my process. So just a new perspective, or probably something you all already know.
Well, I love it, because especially your perspective just set me up for the next question here. So the next question is, can panelists comment on other areas of Jacksonville that have strong potential for placemaking and placekeeping efforts, or efforts that are already underway? And Kady, you just mentioned the work that duPont is doing along the riverfront. This is one of those examples.
And what was the start of that question? It cut out a little bit.
It was, can panelists comment on other areas of Jacksonville that have strong potential for placemaking and placekeeping efforts?
Okay, it's all, the riverfront's probably a good segue for you right there.
I guess I don't understand the question. Are we allowing them to comment on other aspects of?
Well, they're just basically just asking, do you know of any other areas that may be suitable for placemaking projects outside of downtown?
Yeah, so I am not comfortable speaking to that yet. I've absolutely thought through it, and you'll see some of that work come online soon. I'm just not prepared to be a steward or representative or an authority on those spaces, but certainly there's already great placemaking work happening throughout the full city of Jacksonville. I am not your typical bid employee. I I understand the boundaries of the district, but you'll see me working citywide and kind of blending those boundaries. But certainly, oftentimes in cities I speak in or practice in or consult in, people are already placemaking. It's just they're not using that word. So it's also very frustrating for me for that word to either be abused or misunderstood. I'm a teacher. I've taught college level classes on this subject matter. And so I think my first year here can just be reminding people of the great work they've already done in this field. And I would shout some people out, but I don't want to leave anyone out.
Yeah, I mean, so, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, places like Riverside and San Marco, you know, Ennis mentioned Bayless Park as an example of a placemaking activity that went in San Marco, you know, about a decade ago now. So those areas have gotten a lot of love in the last, you know, couple of decades or so. There are other communities. Ennis mentioned briefly the East Side. The East Side was really kind of centered around Florida Avenue, which is now A. Philip Randolph Avenue, for, I mean, really over a century long now. And the avenue was kind of the place to, you know, see and be seen. You know, currently there are organizations in place that are East Side based organizations, which I think is very important, that are kind of putting the infrastructure together to kind of remake the avenue into the place that it once was. And you can see now that a lot of organizations are kind of getting behind the East Side CDC, for instance, is an organization that is really helping the Florida Avenue kind of come back to life. They're working with you know, the Jaguars and Lift Jacks and United Way and ViStar Credit Union and a bunch of other cultural partners that are, you know, providing you know, money and resources to the East Side. I see Tia is here. She wants to remind everybody that there's the Mail-in Market tomorrow in celebration of Juneteenth. You know, 4 times a year, there's a kind of a large Black-owned street festival, you know, business market along Florida Avenue, A. Philip Randolph, and tomorrow is one of those, probably the biggest one of the year. I'm fascinated by Turkeyville. You know, the East Side is starting to get a lot of attention and well deserved, but Turkeyville doesn't really have as much as that infrastructure in place now. You have the Turkeyville Historical Society, which has basically kept Myrtle Avenue going for decades now, and I think that's a place that already has a lot of kind of informal placemaking, you know, or places that are being created by residents that could, you know, really use a lot of, you know, help and funding to make those spaces better.
And I'll just, you know, jump in and add a few things as well. Yeah, there's a number of neighborhoods and places throughout the city, really, where various initiatives and efforts are already underway. And again, like Kady mentioned, they all don't refer to them as placemaking and placekeeping. But Turkeyville is certainly an area where I've been privy to conversations with various groups there that are looking at ways to stimulate inclusive economic development opportunities along Myrtle Avenue, Moncrief Road, up on Moncrief, just north of Turkeyville, and even Newtown along Beaver Street and Kings Road. There's efforts in La Villa, the community's organizing there as downtown continues to revitalize. You know, people have seen what happened to Brooklyn. They don't want that repeated in La Villa. And just because some things have been torn down doesn't mean that infill can't be inclusive in how it goes about. So there's a conversation going on there. Many of those same communities are looking at the East Side, and Mixontown is another one that comes to mind. You know, in my role as a board member of Groundwork Jax, you know, we're in this process of developing the Emerald Trail system, which is a 30-mile network of off-system trails that are going to connect a number of neighborhoods across the core of the city. We know we can look to Atlanta, we can look to, you know, the Beltline, for example, And we know that if we don't do something there, those places can be gentrified and completely changed. So there are a number of communities like Mixon Town that are also in the process of organizing and finding ways to place keep, but also place make, and make sure that the people who are doing the placemaking are actually tied to those communities, so that there's a economic side of that as well, because the economics also play a role in the history and the culture. So stay tuned. I mean, there's a lot going on in Jacksonville. I mean, I've been in town 19 years now, and I can say the conversations that are taking place now, the things that are going on now. If you would have told me 10 years ago that we'd be at this point, I probably would not believe you. So there are a lot of initiatives and efforts that are underway. Before we close, I do want to circle back to one question here. And that question was, this can be a two-part thing now. So that question was, has the pandemic presented opportunities as well as restrictions? But the person who asked that question was thinking more about vacant spaces. And the comment, the follow-up comment is, you know, in LA, there are so many vacancies, even in expensive areas like Beverly Hills. So her question really is has the pandemic created opportunities to place make or place keep vacant spaces, as well as created restrictions from those places being made into something? And I would jump in that for you too, just in case here, because I got some thoughts on that. You know, as an urban planner, I would say yes. So I think some of the comments that are already being mentioned kind of address this somewhat. I know, Mike, some of the initiatives that you worked on, the night market, the food park, both of those are really Kady, you too, up in Flint. Many of the short-term events, initiatives, placemaking, tactical urbanism, whatever you want to call them, they served as incubators to entrepreneurs that have since morphed into brick and mortars. And I know with the food truck work specifically here in downtown and some of the surrounding areas, there are a number of trucks that have morphed into, you know, brick. They do tend to locate in these once distressed commercial districts. I remember Parking King Street, back when we used to throw pub crawls, maybe 10 years ago now. King Street was known for its vacancies. And now people in that area complain about the number of businesses that are there, and they take up all their own street parking. So that's a good example. I would say that's a good example because that was back when we were in the middle of like a huge economic recession, and that was a way to help spur business there. So I do believe that the pandemic does create opportunities for new vacant spaces. The walking tour, as I mentioned earlier, is a great example of that. It allowed people to get out and visit areas of town that they weren't familiar with, may have never gone to. And when people go out on these types of things, they are presented with new opportunities. And a lot of those spaces have since become occupied with new uses. So that would be an example of an opportunity that came through the pandemic. So did I lose one of my panelists? Yeah, I don't see Kady there, but it's about 1:30 anyways. So we're going to get ready to close on out. So, you know, this event is the third of 6 virtual discussions this year that are part of the 2022 2 Centuries of Jacksonville series that is co-produced by myself and the Jessie Ball duPont Fund. The first was the African American cemeteries. The second was focused on the benefits of blue zones. Those 2 events were held back in February and April of this year. If you missed them and you're interested in hearing these topics, they are recorded, and we can get you links to those recordings. Our fourth event will be held virtually on September the 22nd. And so we love to have you join us for that as well. So stay tuned for more details by following the Jaxson Mag on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and also follow the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund as well. So in closing, I do want to thank both you, Kady, and Mike for spending an hour and a half of your time with us today, as well as I want to thank all the guests for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend with us as well. So now I'm going to give you back 4 minutes, and you can go ahead and get your weekend started. So happy Juneteenth, and happy birthday to James Weldon Johnson as well. This is the 17th, right? Yep, James Weldon Johnson's birthday. So happy birthday to him as well. Thank you. Goodbye.